if I told you that Donald Trump's biggest enemies are not the Obama, Clinton, Biden networks, whose heads are on the line in the Russiagate revelations, or even the deep state, but it's the European monarchies who have never stopped their war against the American Republic? Most people think that this is just politics, Republicans versus Democrats, or maybe America versus the globalists. You see the daily battles over Ukraine funding, Fed policy, or the environmental regulations as separate issues. Even Trump supporters often miss the big picture, focusing on individual bad actors or policy disputes. But what we're fighting is a system, properly named the Anglo-Dutch system. And what we're witnessing is unprecedented. An American president waging direct war against the very Anglo-Dutch system that we fought the American Revolution against. Trump isn't just fighting globalists. He's taking on the European monarchy and oligarchy, led by the British monarchy and its Dutch and European partners. This is what's been bleeding America dry through its central banking system, its environmental death cult, and its endless imperial wars. I'm Susan Kokinda, and I've been tracking this imperial system for over 5 decades. I've documented how these same royal families created the Federal Reserve, launched the environmental movement, and started every major war. Tomorrow, Barbara Boyd and I will be doing our second live Q&A to break down exactly how these imperial oligarchies operate. Sign up for our free newsletter at Promethean Action to get the details. But today, I'm exposing 3 fronts in Trump's war against the European oligarchies. First, how King Charles and the Dutch are desperately keeping Ukraine burning. Second, how Trump's economic policies are dismantling their centuries-old ideology of environmental destruction. And third, how his Fed battle strikes at the very heart of the financial empire that's ruled the United States since 1913. So why is the Ukraine war continuing when Trump has a clear mandate to end it, and he wants to end the killing? Because of the empire's stranglehold over Europe. As this is being recorded, the president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is in Moscow, having just concluded a meeting with Russian President Putin in an effort to move the process forward. Preliminary reports characterize the meeting as productive. But it's hard to negotiate when there are other parties on the battlefield. So look at this. The very first European country to pony up almost $600 million in arms purchases from the United States to keep the Ukraine conflict going is the Netherlands. 600 million, that's a small country. This is the Netherlands, as in the Dutch half of the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. And the other European countries that immediately jumped in? Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Notice something? They're all monarchies. You can use your favorite AI to look at the ties between these royal families and the British monarchy. This is all part of the same imperial structure that has been in a war with sovereign republics for centuries. Remember, we wouldn't be here in the first place if Britain's Boris Johnson hadn't ordered Zelensky to walk away from a negotiated settlement back in April 2022. That's the Anglo side of the Anglo-Dutch system. And don't forget Zelensky's 2 visits with King Charles this year. That's the empire calling in its puppet. Now, here's what they don't want you to see. While Europe keeps things stirred up, Trump, Putin, and Witkoff are trying their damnedest to make progress. While Witkoff's meeting with Putin was preceded by some typical Trump-like moves, such as wielding the sanctions threat against Russia, Trump also made the point that Russia knows how to deal with them. Yes, Trump made public the repositioning of U.S. nuclear subs after former Prime Minister Medvedev made some very inflammatory remarks. But here is how Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov contrasted the U.S. position on Ukraine to that of the Europeans as recently as this August 1st statement. For now, progress is primarily seen in the fact that our American colleagues, unlike the Europeans who are focused on aggressive Russophobia, are aware of the current realities and are trying to take into account the root causes of the crisis. And while the Europeans are hysterically demanding that Ukraine be dragged into NATO and prepared for war with Russia, Mr. Rubio recently confirmed a responsible approach, clearly stating that a direct military confrontation between the United States and Russia should never be allowed. We fully agree with this, and this is also the result of mutual understanding achieved through Russian-American dialogue. Less reported but equally important, Russia continues targeting the British hand behind the provocations. Russian military intelligence, for the second time in recent weeks, pointed to the British as the instigators of possible false flag provocations in the Baltic Sea. The fact that Russia understands where the real provocations are coming from gives Trump and Witkoff a little more maneuvering room in what is otherwise a very dangerous situation to unpack. Now let's look at how Trump's crushing of the Green New Deal goes to the heart of the anti-growth green ideology that has been imposed on us directly by the Anglo-Dutch over the past 6 decades. Trump is carrying out a full-on reversal against the evil anti-human ideology of environmentalism, which puts man on the level of the beasts and says, let Mother Nature rule. Trump's administration is making massive moves that most people don't understand the significance of. Halting insane wind and solar projects, establishing energy density as the basis for power plants, even building a nuclear reactor on the moon. What the Trump team is saying is we are reestablishing the principle of exerting greater dominion over nature, including on the moon. Now, these aren't discrete policy moves. They represent a return to running an economy on the basis of scientific and human principles. Take the Interior Department's new order. Today, U.S. Secretary of Interior Doug Burgum signed a secretary's order to more efficiently manage our nation's energy resources by permitting projects that optimize energy generation while minimizing their environmental impact. Massive, unreliable energy projects, such as wind and solar, are inefficient uses of federal lands when compared to other energy sources with smaller footprints, like nuclear, gas, and coal. This reflects a return to scientific sanity and a recognition that there are certain physical principles involved in exerting greater dominion over nature, what Lyndon LaRouche called energy flux density, which govern whether a society goes forward or backward. And this is a complete rejection of the evil ideology of environmentalism, whose purpose is to drive society backwards. And guess where modern environmentalism came from? The Anglo-Dutch royal families. The mothership of environmentalism, of modern environmentalism, the World Wildlife Fund, was created in 1961 by Prince Philip, the consort of then Queen Elizabeth, and by Prince Bernhard, the consort of then Dutch Queen Juliana. In order to marry Juliana in 1936, Bernhard had to resign from the Nazi SS. He did so in a letter to Hitler, signing his resignation with Heil Hitler. Prince Philip's siblings were married into pro-Nazi aristocratic families in Germany. He maintained relations with the pro-Nazi Edward VIII after Edward abdicated because of his too close ties to Hitler. But one doesn't really have to rely on Philip's family ties to establish his bona fides. This quote should be enough. In the event that I am reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus to contribute something to solving overpopulation. So you see, these aren't just lunatic democratic policies or socialist policies, unless you want to call it National Socialism. These are core principles of the oligarchy itself, designed to limit human economic development, reduce populations, and maintain imperial control. Trump's moves, from stopping wind and solar to promoting nuclear and space-based power, represent a fundamental rejection of this anti-human technology that has crippled American, and for that matter, the world's development for decades. Now, if the war and environmentalism are two weapons of the elite, then central banking is the financial enforcement arm of their control. Since 1913, we've been under the sway of an Anglo-Dutch central banking system, and Donald Trump has picked a massive fight with Fed Chairman Jerome "Too Late" Powell. Not in this century have we seen such a public confrontation with the Federal Reserve. Speaking on CNBC recently, Trump continued his attack on Powell's refusal to lower interest rates.
I wanted it a year ago. I wanted it a long time ago. Jay Powell is highly political, and I think, I call him too late. Jerome Too Late Powell. He's too late. He's too late always. He always has been, except when it came to lowering interest rates before the election.
Now Trump has the opportunity to pick a replacement for the Fed governor who just resigned, and many expect this person to ultimately replace Powell next year when his term is up. But if you trace the origins of central banking, where private bankers take control of a nation's monetary policy, you have to go back to Venice at the end of the 16th century. Then follow those forces as they established the Dutch Central Bank and the Dutch East India Company before moving across the Channel to establish the Bank of England and the British East India Company. A lot of comments on our videos express confusion when we talk about the British. This is what we're talking about, and you can find more resources by going to the Toolkit tab on the Promethean Action website. Trump has now opened a public discussion of the very premises of the Fed. As Treasury Secretary Bessent said, has it failed in its mission? Well, if the mission is to grow the physical economy of the United States, it was created to fail, or rather to subvert American prosperity. While the discussion unfolds, the principles of a renewed American system are becoming the constant theme of this administration. Physical growth, productive jobs, revival of blue-collar manufacturing, not corporate or monetary profit. Listen to Trade Representative Jamison Greer responding to concerns about corporations feeling pain from tariffs.
Reductions in profits come at a cost, right? And as CEOs are making decisions, how long do you expect this pain to last for corporate America?
Well, again, when we look at when we look at the numbers and the data, we're seeing predictions of more investment here. That's what we want. The president isn't doing this so much for the companies. He's doing it for American workers who have seen their jobs offshored to Mexico, to Vietnam, to China. So when we hear companies having to make hard choices about supply chain changes, we have to do that. I mean, the status quo where we keep making things overseas because we can do it a little bit cheaper in the short run, that is not preferable to having that investment and employment here in the United States.
The battle lines couldn't be clearer. I know many of you watching this are passionate about this fight. But if you want to understand how to identify and defeat the real enemy and how to support Trump's American system against centuries of imperial control, then join our community at Promethean Action by subscribing, or better yet, becoming a paying member. What we've covered today isn't just political analysis. It's a roadmap to understanding the battle of our time and a strategy for victory. We've exposed how the British and the Dutch are keeping Zelensky going, how Trump is dismantling the Nazi-rooted environmental ideology that has strangled American development, and how his fight with the Federal Reserve strikes at the heart of 300 years of financial control. This is why the intelligence apparatus is in a panic mode. This is why the headlines scream about turmoil in the global economy as if that's a bad thing. This is why the entire European oligarchy is mobilized against one man. But they're too late. Trump isn't just winning elections, he's reviving the American productive spirit that built this nation. The steel workers in Pittsburgh, the auto workers supporting his tariffs, the vision of nuclear reactors on the moon, this is America remembering what made us great. The 300-year-long Anglo-Dutch stranglehold on human civilization is ending. The only question is, how quickly can we end it, and whether enough Americans will understand what's really at stake and join this fight. So stay focused, stay mobilized, and thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.